Hey guys, welcome back. It's Malferon here, and I'm excited to share these lists with Sapphire Steel that I think will serve you well at your set champs. So without much further ado, we'll dive right in. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter video than I typically do. It's going to be high yield, high impact. We'll talk about the lists and their strengths, their weaknesses, how I've seen multiples of them fare at different set champs, the one I took, and the one that got me my mat and my promo, and my first place win. So here we go. So first off, Sapphire Steel, which is of course my favorite color combo, has a pretty interesting spread in regards to the set 11 meta, right? Sapphire Steel has always historically done very well into Purple Steel. Purple Steel just is always going to be around. And at my set champs, it was about, 20% of the room was Purple Steel. And I think that's not unusual. Purple Steel has like a 50-50 matchup into most things. But one of the few matchups they really don't want to see is Sapphire Steel, right? And so sometimes, especially if they're going first and they're playing a more aggro version, they can get to 20 a little bit too fast. But the majority of builds have to balance some spread of bursting that lore, but also controlling the board and a little bit of tempo. And those ones, we just kind of end up running away with the game, right? And so Purple Steel is very favorable for us. Ruby, Amethyst, Red Purple is essentially a free win. So if you run into one of those in almost any build, but especially an aerial build, you should just take it home. Amber Steel, interestingly enough, as the meta has evolved, went from a kind of a neutral matchup to one that I would say is very favored for Sapphire Steel. It's a matchup where you just have to control your fear and anxiety if they get their powerful Akud opening, right? Like if they pop off and they're getting like an early 4-drop Singer, or they're establishing Troubadour and then they're playing like a 5-drop Stitch, like putting out multiple Willows, etc., etc. Maybe they strength, maybe they bolt even early on, right? Maybe they find that early dock. All of this is intimidating, right? But if you keep establishing your high impact characters, like if you play your Tinkerbell, if you play your Ariel, if you play your Pete, if you play your Vincenzo, your Hades, as the game will go on, there will reach a point where they will hit nothing but dead draws or weenies, right? Like a bunch of 1-drops, 2-drops they really don't want to see. And their songs will not be enough for your high value cards, right? And you kind of just like take the game back. That's happened like very consistently in most of my matchups. So Amber Steel, as long as you can really be selective about what you pick with your removal, and you almost always are prioritizing removal on their draw engines. So, the 4-drop Ariel has to go, the 5-drop Stitch has to go. And then kind of like after that, you're, kind of balancing between like, do I prioritize taking out a 4-drop Rhino or one of their other like singers, right? And then all the other weenies kind of like, go last. So Sapphire Steel, as the meta's gone on, I think is quite favored into Amber Steel, and they really kind of have to like hit their ideal play line and go really wide, while hopefully popping off at least 1 or 2 of your characters, maybe with a Lucky Chief Powhatan to kind of close the game in most case scenarios. Neutral matchups, I would consider, these are matchups that I think can really go either way, and a lot of it depends a little bit on what the build is like. So for Blurple, right, I've always considered Blurple a relatively like 45-55 or 50-50 matchup depending on the player. I think you're very much playing against the player more so than the deck in many cases. And so the other thing about Blurple is that it's just like very prone to high rolls on both ends, right? So this is a matchup that really suffers from being on the draw. And it's a matchup that, if either side kind of has their high roll, if they like empty their hand and go like Isis, Elsa, Demona, or like even like Genie openers into ending with the Demona and then into the Hades and then to Let It Go, right? But if we also like open up first and we like play the Cindy and then we spam a Bolt and then we play Goliath and they don't have Let It Go to get rid of it, and then we just do like Vincenzo into Hades into Ariel into both sides kind of just like can end up steamrolling the other. And so it's a very interesting matchup in that regard. But many of these games, similar to Amber Steel games, end up having a lot of back and forth. So understanding like what you prioritize your removal on, and knowing when to deploy your draw engine. I think the number one thing about Blood Bowl matchups is you want to be very, very careful about when you actually play your Goliath and when you actually play your Pete, understanding that those are going to be ink targets number one, right? So a big piece of Blurple is knowing like how and when to bait out characters that you know they'll either have to remove to like line up with their curve, right? Like if you see them approaching 7 ink, maybe you put out a Tinkerbell, maybe you put out some other like card that you anticipate that they should and are likely going to answer, and that burns like their Hades, their Let It Go or whatever, and then you actually deploy like your draw engine or your priority card, etc. So that's something you have to really get in the mindset of with Blurples, like putting out baits and switch, and then as they continue to give you ink through the game, they'll reach a point where you start like you can outvalue them. But it's a matchup that can be rough on other end. Yellow Purple is very fascinating in that like the new flavor of Yellow Purple, with like spamming a lot of the board wipes, Raging Storm, and then deploying libraries and just kind of just stalling for time, right? Doing a lot of things that freeze exerts, a lot of rush characters to essentially like protect the libraries and then just keep resetting the board. That's a pretty hard matchup, I think, if you, especially if you start off kind of slow and aren't able to deploy your early bodies and get that strong early lore, right? Because a lot of their early game characters, especially 1 through 4 ink, just kind of do nothing. And so if you're able to like establish like good strong singers or questers, and then kind of before they are Raging Storming and you're maybe getting to like anywhere between like 10 to 16 lore, it's pretty easy. It's like easy enough to close out, but if they're able to stall really, really well, those matchups can be pretty annoying and frustrating, especially if you don't run Beyond the Horizon or keep the Ancient Ways. I'd say like almost any other version of Yellow Purple, like tempo versions, mid-range versions, are essentially free matchups. You can just think of them as like, Ruby Amethyst Plus, and you kind of want to see that. Obviously, the mirror is kind of tricky. Play versus draw favors into that very heavily. Whoever Cindy's first and then sings Bolt and then plays Goliath. In most case scenarios, you kind of just win. And then from there, it's just like whoever top decks more Hades is and removal. Dogs yellow green is an interesting matchup. It can feel extremely just hopeless, right? Like if they just get the perfect Della's Under the Sea turn 4, where like if they're even like Under the Sea your Tinkerbell, right? But at the same time, like we kind of just have like auto win game states as well, where like if you play your first Tinkerbell and then you play a second Tinkerbell, and if that second Tinkerbell splashes and wipes out 3 or 4 characters immediately, many Dogs players will just quit, right? Or if they like set up their whole play line for that fast Chromicon and then you just Pluto or Donald it immediately, then many of them will just quit as well. And so it's a very like knife's edge matchup. I would say that like more consistently they can find what they want against us than us against them. Like we need a very, very specific particular hand. And you can do angel lines against yellow green commonly, but that doesn't feel like great either, especially if they have a good refill with 5-drop lady. So I'm putting it neutral, right? I definitely don't consider it like consistently unfavorable, but Dogs rarely feels like favorable. So I'd say it's very much a skill matchup. The matchups that just feel terrible, no matter what version of Blue Steel you play, is going to be blue green, yellow blue, and green purple, right? Maybe the new like locations, like with mines, right, version will feel a little bit better into this, but the majority of times these are just miserable matchups and are going to be tough no matter how many times you play them and practice for them. So that's just kind of is what it is. So I think this is a good, fair matchup spread. So the first deck list I wanted to talk about here is Sonic Boom. This is my list. This is kind of like my claim to fame. There's a set 10 video that I've already made, and there's a set 11 video on its way. This list is near and dear to my heart. I've put so many reps into this list. I've played at least 1,000 games online to end at the list that you guys see in front of you right now. It is a 61 card list, and it prioritizes an extreme amount of adaptability, removal, and essentially like, when you establish your engine, it is so hard to lose, right? And really like the only thing it really can and does sort of struggle into is like a very, very timely board wipe that you were not able to prepare for. And essentially like, the kind of struggle lists, right? Like, blue, green, yellow, blue, etc. But almost any build will. Now this deck kind of consistently stomps most purple decks, right? Especially purple steel, and has an extremely high win rate against amber steel. So mid range it kind of just feasts upon, and does pretty well into aggro as well, especially if you see your cheek lines and then you follow it up with aerial lines, right? And so this, the mulligan and the general strategy is very straightforward. The first 5 ink, right? You want to find turn 2 ramp. You want to find Cinderella. The majority of games you are finding yourself like inking Mulan turn 1 if you have Mulan and you're on the play. If you know it's an aggro matchup and you are setting up for Tinkerbell math, you could play your Mulan. Or if you're trying to go for an early Beyond the Horizon line, playing like Mulan Tipo and then your 4-drop. But I'd say, or like trying to get rid of a bad hand. I'd say otherwise, Mulan is designed as like cheap Pluto triggers and just to like help dig a little bit further while establishing a body if you don't have your turn 2 ramp or like Cinderella. You almost always want to find Cinderella. Belle is like a soft 5th Cinderella backup, right? Because if you have Tipo or Mulan with Belle and they have an exerted character, you can kind of just run them into that character, hopefully trade, and then she can still get you a 2-4-6 ramp line in certain situations. Or if you have Belle and you establish her and you're on the play, you can just start aggressively questing, and you really don't care if anyone dies because they give you ink. And so then she turns into like a 2-4-6 anyway, which is really, really cool. This also makes Belle a very safe singer. Like you can sing with Bolt with her, and you really don't mind if she gets banished because she would just turn into ink, right? So like no matter what, you win. So that feels kind of cool. I was really tempted to take Angel to 3. I think Angel at 2 feels best. There's a lot of games where just a top deck Angel or just Angel in general just feels extremely underwhelming or poorly timed. And so there's a little bit too many games of that for me, like having pushed her to 3 in this list. But 2 feels right to kind of help complete aerial math. Take out Grandmother Willows for certain particular lines that really matter, etc. The one Moana, so I used to run 2. The one Moana now is, she gets a lot of value when her timing is right. Her problem is that like with the rise of Amber Steel again, she's bolt food. So she just, immediately dies to any hero to Thunderbolt and, or like even a strength on curve. So you almost never play Moana on curve. Like we can't really afford that like yellow blue can, because she just sets up there easy, like very fast 8 ink for Raging Storm. But for us, she's a value engine, right? She maintains a lot of hand advantage, and she allows you to delay a Goliath for a while. But she is just a little bit too vulnerable. So that's why she's good enough to where I keep her at 1, but she's like she's too vulnerable to where like having her higher than 1 just felt bad. Pete, of course, and Pete for consistency, Namari for digging and finding songs and taking out locations. For item removal, I was running Donald for a very, very long time, the 5-drop Donald, who banishes an item instantly on play. Pluto, you have to play another steel character to banish an item. The reason I chose Pluto over Donald, kind of like last minute, honestly, it was like the day before set champs, was really just like I just didn't want to lose to any snow forts, right? Like Donald is good for handling Chromicon, Emerald Chromicon, but really it's pretty rare you run into that, and if you do, it's a little lucky that you need to find it anyway. And Emerald Chromicon games kind of like end usually like within 1 or 2 turns after it's deployed, so you either have it or you don't. But Snowfort games tend to be like long drawn out hauls, and so the odds of finding one of your item removals in Snowfort games, especially with green purple, is a lot higher. And thus, so you have a little bit more time to actually locate your item removal. And having repetitive item removal, like Pluto allows, for something like Snowfort is pretty important, because they very often are, they're almost always running 4, and they very often will stack them. Like, they'll like hold a couple Snowforts to just like end up getting that like impossible board state. And so that's why Pluto was a slightly more favored over Donald, was to have that repetitive item removal specifically for things like a Snowfort. So. The spread of songs, like I go over this more in detail in the video, specifically on Sonic Boom, but, it's got its strong foundation, right? 4 strength, 4 bolt, and 3 let it go. I found 3 is fine. Many other aerial builds will run 4 let it go. I think that's a little overkill. Some people will run like 4 let it go, 3 strength. I think strength is the more consistent, helpful late game in the majority of board states. When you get there, let it go is convenient, right? But let it go, you almost never want to do on curve, because inking is actually very relevant for your opponent. Strength also you almost never do early, because you just don't have the character count to make it relevant, but also like you don't quite have the spare ink to use an aerial trigger quite yet. But as the game goes on, it's actually one of the most powerful late game songs you can get, because you can remove massive bodies and get very cheap aerial triggers, and you can sing it with your Cinderella, who's not questing for much anyway. Because as the game goes on, you actually would rather quest with your 5 and 6 drops, and not sing with them, which is the one disadvantage to Let It Go. Like you're compelled to sing with one of your 2 questers, whereas like, you'd rather sing with like Angel or Cinderella, who are only questing for 1. So. Down in New Orleans is my personal spice card. It's swung way too many games getting out a free 6-cost character. And then, Beyond the Horizons is a minimum, right? You have to have that to be able to hit greedy hands. And then Mob Song, I consider this a core card. It is absolutely goated. It's won way too many games and allows you to completely swing entire board states. So this is a version of Sonic Boom, but with Mufasa. I tested Mufasa for a long time, and in fact, I was going to run the Mufasa variant up until about a week before it set champs. I really don't have a great reason why I didn't stick with Mufasa. I think really it came down to, between my 2 spice cards of Down in New Orleans versus Mufasa, I just liked Dino more in that moment, which is kind of why I chose that pathway. Mufasa is very good, very strong. Actually, getting to Mufasa is pretty easy and surprisingly consistent, right? Like if you go Cindy into Ariel, you're already at 8 ink, and then you could play Mufasa. Mufasa has a little bit too many answers for the general meta, so you have to be very strategic about when you play Mufasa. He can be Delazed, and then Under the Seed by dogs. He can be obviously Hades or Let It Go. But Steel builds almost will never have any answer to him. He's extremely, extremely hard to answer with Steel. He essentially creates an auto win state for Purple Steel and Amber Steel. They have no good answers for him, and he's an immediate must answer, which is a really cool feeling, right? And the idea that you could play like 2 Vincenzos, 2 Hades, or play a bomb, and then spend the next reset your ink and then just spam songs with Ariel, all of that feels incredibly powerful and oppressive and fun. And so definitely he works in Ariel. And so I think it's just a matter of getting a feel for what you feel like your meta might do and just kind of the mood that you're in. So Jasmine Allies, this is a foundational list that is largely inspired by what Harlan Sweet sort of ended on. Harlan Sweet is a very big Sapphire Steel content creator out of the UK. And he's been making videos on Sapphire Steel very consistently for a long time. He's a great, knowledgeable player. Has gone to like multiple large events, DLCs. And Allies, ever since Allies has been a thing, is kind of his thing, and he puts a lot of effort into making Allies. A lot of people are very familiar with Allies. They like Allies. Allies is a strong foundational Sapphire Steel list. If you're going to take any Sapphire Steel list and you're a little nervous about either like maybe being unfamiliar with the color combo, or what you might expect in the meta, or if you just kind of want something that's relatively straightforward, Allies is the list you should take. It's all about maintaining a good card advantage, shifting Jasmine, finding allies, and then, just playing your bodies, right? And just knowing when to use proper removal. I have slightly more removal than some others, right? So I'm running 3 strength and 4 bolt. Some people have cut down to 2 strength. Some people have just even removed strength. And then, there's a general spread of somewhat techie allies, right? 2 scuttles for, blue matchups in general. 2 Plutos to kind of help with burst of lore, but also like get rid of items, and that's a little easier to find with Jasmine triggers. And then, many people will run 4 Hades. I'm a huge believer in the 3 Hades, 1 Arthur. Like Arthur is way too valuable. He allows you to get rid of warded characters. He synergizes extremely well with Tinkerbell and Pluto. And I think he's clearly earned his spot on top of questing for 3, right? So this Allies version does run Cindy. Not all Allies versions run Cindy. Some co-op to like optimize Pleek a little bit more and just kind of save on their uninkables. I think she allows too much diversity in your openers, and being able to have that diversity to be able to go like 2-4-6 or like shift Jasmine, like, and then follow it up with Tipo or follow it up with Pleekly or follow it up with Sail, and then there's a lot of ways to open up your game, which is another strength of Allies, and this allows a lot of consistency because there's very few hands that are truly like dead brick hands, right? So Allies, solid build. Not my preferred play style, right? I prefer Aerial Sonic Boom, but solid build and still a lot of fun. So this is Dwarven Allies. utilizing the 7 Dwarf Mines and a few extra copies of Happy. This is a list that is heavily inspired by Cheeto's lists, formerly known as Sam the Dude, an extremely talented young player who really he's not like hardcore committed to Sapphire Steel, but he plays a variety of lists and he plays them all well. Right? He's very, very skilled. So he kind of committed and went through a journey of different Sapphire Steel lists, and he just really looked like, how can I make a list that makes 7 Dwarfs Mine a strong integral part of removal. And so it runs 3 Happies, right, to allow access to easier access 7 Dwarfs Mine triggers, especially on curve, right? Like you could play Happy, play Mines, and then next turn you can like move to the Mines, right? And so, or even you can even play Mines on turn 2, and then play Happy, and then move to the Mines on turn 3, right? So the Happy opens up a lot of those, and he's anti-evasives, which is kind of cool. Otherwise, it's an allies list, right? Plays like allies. When you deploy Mines is usually later in the game, right? Or maybe the only build you'd even consider running it earlier in your line would be like potentially dogs if you can get rid of a Willow really fast with a Happy line. But outside of that, it's basically it's just allies. But you could think of 7 Dwarfs Mine as like a very different strength of Raging Fire. Now, one cool thing that this build tries to do and achieve is have a better game into the board wipe decks, right? Like if they board wipe you, but you have 2 or 3 7 Dwarfs Mines in play, right? You get time to reestablish your board, but also you're gaining that passive lore. And so you're kind of like, giving like decks like yellow, purple a taste of their own medicine, which is kind of cool. So there's a little bit more flexibility for those board wipe decks, which is part of the inspiration of why it was made. So this is my detective list, right? This is Darkwing Detectives. So it's a pretty big evolution from where set 10 detectives came from. There's a little bit more variety in having like consistent draw options. So there is 3 Pete in here on top of the 4 Nick and the 4 Judy Hops. There's the new Darkwing line in general, right? So we have our new legendary, the 7-drop Darkwing Duck, Cool Under Pressure, who allows you to hit readied villain characters. Very, very cool. And he's just a massive body, 6'8" quest for 2 that you can find with a Judy, right? You can snag him with Judy, which is extremely powerful. And then he synergizes, of course, with 6-drop Judy and 5-drop Nick, so you can draw, you can gain resist, all while like using his massive stat line. You can shift him on 5, right? So we do have a more large, robust variety of 1 and 2 drops, and we're utilizing the underdog Judy in this build to allow a very safe and convenient shift target for our 6-drop Judy, and to have a little bit more, oomph on the draw. I am using 2 of the Thunderquacks and 2 of the Darkwing Tower. Darkwing Tower, if you have, if a character here banishes a villain character, you can ready a character there, and then Thunderquack, all your opponents, it's an item, all your opponents' characters become villains, which means if you save Darkwing Tower and like have a Thunderquack on the play, you can set up a turn where you can have like a Judy Hops or a Darkwing Duck effectively like wipe an entire board by just like challenge re-rating if you're able to keep banishing. And so it's allowed for a massive swingy board states, and is a pretty cool like win condition if you can set up for it. Yeah, and it's a chunky location too, gains 1 lore, it's 8 willpower. McHorn has been huge, right? McHorn has optimized a lot of like really cool Judy lines where you could play Judy Hops on 4, use her to either quest to find a McHorn or play a McHorn, and he's this massive 6'5" bodyguard protecting your draw engine Judy Hops. So McHorn's definitely earned his place a lot. And then Genie is just a really nice big body that quests safely and can facilitate like draws with like Nick and Judy because he can challenge pretty safe with his massive 7 willpower. This is Ducktectives. This is a version of Detectives that was made really popular by RMB, who's a really, really big Sapphire Steel content creator. He's also, one of the co-creators of Maelstrom, and a very big Lorcana team, and just a well-known Lorcana player in general. Right, great guy and good friend. And so his build is it's very different. With different lines, and it puts a strong emphasis on consistency. And so, you can tell that the amount of cards, the variety of cards is smaller because the amount of cards are very optimized to, consistently find what you want to find. It's using Donald as item removal. It's got, the Terror that flaps in the night as a pretty interesting on-curve removal, right? And so you can do 2 damage or 3 damage if you have a Darkwing Duck in play to a chosen character. and then it's like maxing out all counts of Darkwing. 4 of the 1-drop, 4 of the 2-drop, and 4 of the 7-drop. You play Mickey on turn 3 for your ramp, right? Or sail on certain particular lines, whether you want to get into a fast Judy or a fast 5-drop, and then kind of weave and removal in between. So solid build. And then this is one of my kind of fun little cooks, rat behavior. It's probably going to be one of your lesser consistent builds in regards to success in set champs compared to all the others we've just talked about. However, this is an extremely strong anti-meta call if you are anticipating a lot of blue at your local set champs, right? So if you're expecting a lot of blurple, a lot of green blue, a lot of yellow blue, blue steel, right? They will hate this list. This list is extremely oppressive into blue. It's really using a high count of Beyond the Horizons to punish hands. Half the deck is warded. If you play Kita into Cluck, into Scuttle, most of these decks have nothing to do against that. You're gaining value, you're gaining ink, you're questing safely, and then you get to Radigan, who is just he's a massive clock, right? He quests for 4, he's ward, he's 6/7. So they only have effectively they better have a board wipe, or there's no real reasonable way to get rid of a Radigan. And so it's just endless bombs after endless bombs. The only downside is that its opener is a little slow, right? So, it's not utilizing Cinderella, and it is putting a little bit heavier reliance on its 1-drops to stall time. So if you do run into things like dogs or very fast purple steel, they might be able to go a little too fast. But, for blue decks, it will be an absolute nightmare. So that's the lists I wanted to cover today. Feel free to take them. Please, if you run any of these lists or lists similar to them, put them in the comments, right? Like share your experiences of how you did in set champs. I'd love to know. And then if you have people that are interested in Sapphire Steel and really want to explore this color combo, share the video. And then don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell everyone else about, the greatness of Sapphire Steel. It just hits right. It just hits right. You walk away and you're just like, that's some good Lorcana. That's some good Lorcana. Well, hey guys, thanks for watching. May you be blessed. You know how it is. Take it easy. Peace.